is Valley's People, episode 2 for 1981. It's 30 minutes in duration. It's replay to be advised.
Hello and welcome again to the Valley's People. Today we have two more interesting guests for you. The first is someone that you might normally expect to find on page 7 of Saturday's Newcastle Morning Herald. And the second is someone that would be, I think, a very interesting driver if ever you were going to or from hospital in an ambulance. I hope you can stay for today's Valley's People. Thanks for joining us today, the Valley's People. First guest, well, is someone that you could describe as, I guess, about anything. Naturalist photographer, sportsman, optometrist, TV cameraman, and I guess I've left an awful lot out of the life of Athel D'Ombrain. Welcome to the Valley's People, Athel.
Good evening, Ron.
And I understand that it all began with a little piece of equipment that you have brought with you today, which is about the oldest flashlight any of our viewers will ever see. Is that right?
Well, it began a good deal before that, but that was the start of the flashlight part of the photography. I'd read in the National Geographic where this Frank Chapman in Colorado had taken these marvellous pictures of animals and got a friend to bring one over from America. So I set it up in the Barrington Tops near the guest house. We used to go up there and set it up on Sunday and get photos of wallabies, anything that came along, possums, even birds.
And what year are we talking about now?
Well, when I got that was 1932, and I had been taking photographs a good time before that, but from 1932 on I spent quite a number of years with this equipment. We'd go up and put it on there on the Sunday, and of course just drive away, and Mr. McLeod, who was the manager at the time, he'd ring up perhaps a week's time and say, "It went off last night, Mr. D'Ombrain," and we'd just get in the car, have a rush tea and drive the 70-odd miles up there and pick up the slide and come back and develop it.
Well, how could the manager of the guest house tell you that it went off?
Oh, it made a most terrific noise.
Oh, really?
Yes. It's this is the equipment. There's a magnesium powder in there, and when the animal trod on the wire, this made contact, and this thing went off with a terrific explosion, went down, and that took the photograph, which was fastened onto the shutter of the camera, and the resultant flash took the photograph, and that was how we knew it. He'd hear it during the night. Not only would he hear it, but even back as far as the guest house, it would light up the whole of the interior of the guest house.
It's almost a wartime secret weapon you've got, Athel. But really, when you look at that, which is, we're talking about 1930, streets away from the modern electronic flash gun, isn't it? But that was the way in which you took nighttime naturalist photographs.
Yes, even before that they used to do it with just handheld magnesium. Of course, you didn't hand weight there and get animals like that, but this was a specially improved one from America called the Nesbitt high-speed flash equipment.
You ever tried on home-type burglars or noises around the house?
Yes, we did, as a matter of fact. The garbage tin lid used to go off every night, and we didn't know what was doing it. So I decided I'd try it out and find out who the culprit was. And we wired it all up, and I told the milkman to be careful because he came pretty early in the morning. I didn't want to frighten him out. And I woke up one night, and I don't know why I woke up, but I went down the hall. I thought I'd better disconnect this thing. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. When I opened the door, there was a cat staring at me. And he dashed off, and I put my hand up over my face, expecting to be the resultant bang. But what had happened, he'd already tripped the shutter, taken his photograph, and woken me up. And the resultant picture showed him pushing his forepaws onto the lid of the garbage tin and removing the lid that way. The most unexpected thing, because I thought it'd been a dog, but certainly not a cat.
Yeah, they're very sneaky alley cats, I would think. Athel D'Ombrain, it's extremely difficult in an interview like this to cover a life of so vast a magnitude as your own. I just been hunting around, and some of the locals told me that you in fact hold the record for throwing a cricket ball furthest, if not Australia, the world.
It's not the world. I can't claim that. That's 140 yards. But I do claim one that's 139 yards, 7 inches. And that was made at the boys' home at Gosford. I used to play cricket with them down there on the Sundays. I had an orchard not far away at Somersby. And I don't know whether it was from throwing oranges for practice or what. I apparently got a pretty good long arm. And one of the officers, very ungentlemanly-like, said one day, "Who's that bloke down there with the arms like an ape?" Referring to my big long arms. You see, I saw me throwing the cricket ball. And so they put me on to throw the cricket ball and measure it. And when they did particularly measure them, I didn't often do that, I used to just throw it for fun. But they measured 2 or 3 of them, and I threw from behind the dead ball line on the football field, through and over the goal post at the far end. And the best throw I did was 139 yards, 7 inches.
It's a wonder you haven't been invited back, Athel. That sort of thing is fantastic. But then, when you're talking about Athel D'Ombrain and sport, we're talking about, what, archery, cricket coaching, discus throwing, javelin throwing, archery. What have I missed? Anything? Even before you started game fishing. Now, where did you get this love of sport?
I don't know. I think I just liked walking, I liked running, and living an existence a good deal of my life in the bush and climbing up through mountains and everything like that. I was sport-minded, I think, and all those things, somebody would say, come along and what about if we form an archery club? Or when I first came to Maitland, they said, would you help us form the old athletic club? So I did, and joined in, and during this throwing business at the boys' homes, I got interested in the javelin and discus, because this officer said, you ought to be good at throwing a javelin. And he took me down to Western Suburbs, and I joined up there, and that was where I started throwing javelins. And from that I got into running a bit. I used to run the mile, and discus throwing, and those were my 3 main things: the discus, the javelin and the mile.
Yes, makes a little envious, those people who start talking about all-round performers. But Athel D'Ombrain, the people in Maitland would probably register you as a very successful businessman later on in your life, but it wasn't always that way, was it? I mean, I learned that you, in fact, went broke early. You came up the hard way.
Yes, we did. We had a very nice orchard at Somersby, and we won a prize in the Wembley exhibition for some oranges we sent over. And
Wembley, England, we're talking about?
Yes, this was in 1920. And the government wrote back and said, congratulations, and we'd like you to export your fruit, and we'll guarantee you against loss. On the strength of that, we built the first packing shed at Somersby. And we all exported our fruit over with 3 different lots of shipments. And unfortunately, in those days, they didn't keep very good check on their temperatures, and all the temperatures were messed up, and the fruit all arrived no good. So in 3 shipments, we lost the whole lot, and we all went broke.
I can laugh. I mean, I know that you had a coronary in the 1970s, but you could have been excused for having one earlier.
Yes, well, that's just the way life goes. It's one of those things, you put a lot of work into growing good fruit, and then somebody else goes and messes it up. Right.
Now, how was this forming your interest in game fishing? And because you wrote books on game fishing.
When we left Gosford, I came to Maitland, and I had a chap named Newman Silverthorne, who was one of my greatest friends, and he joined me up with the Newcastle Snapper Club. They had some great fantastic name of Deep Sea and something other, Game Snapper Club, but all they did was go out from snapper fishing expeditions. They had a great big boat, and headquarters was Bundabar Bay, and they mostly fished for snapper. But Newman said to me one day, both of us being Zane Grey addicts on these wonderful books he wrote about sharks and marlin, he said, Dommy, what about going and getting some big game gear? So we went around to Cyril O'Huse in Sydney, who was a relative of Newman's, and made some extraordinary rods. One was black palm, which you couldn't bend, and the other was a great big split cane rod, which you couldn't bend, and an ordinary old Nottingham 1-to-1 reel. And we went out trying to catch sharks and marlin. Of course, you couldn't do it on a snapper boat, so we picked up old Jack Jensen's trawler. No seats or anything, we just sat on our bottoms on the boat. And for some years we never caught anything. And then they shifted the camp from Bundabar Bay to Shoal Bay and built the clubhouse there. And that was the start of it. In 1935, Newman and Silrohue and myself came in with 3 sharks.
And you went on to write fishing off the Australian coast and fishing
Yes,
sales?
later on when we improved and we knew that marlin were about in the summer months and we got better gear and we were starting to catch marlin, catch sharks, Max Lawson said to me one day, "I want you to write a book on game fishing." And I had no intention of writing it. And I said, "You've got plenty of people there that can write a book better than me." "No," he said, "you do it." He said, "I want you to do it." So I wrote that in my spare time.
Yes. The fascination that you have, and I guess the fascination people have about you on bird watching, I think that maybe the most incredible study that you've made over 40 years or more has been for the Gould petrel in New South Wales.
Yes, that was over a very long period. When I first came to Maitland and I was doing the game fishing, I knew the Gould petrel was on this island and we went past it every day.
What island was that?
Cabbage Tree. The
Port Stephens, Cabbage
yes,
Tree.
between the north and south head. There's Big Island and Cabbage Tree and then Little Island further out. And I'd known from my father, who was one of the early ornithologists, that the Gould petrel was on this island. First thing I did was go ashore and find it. And then from then on, I made an annual, one or perhaps 2 or 3 trips a year onto the island. I went with Albert Gwynn from Glampton here, who was with me on nearly all my expeditions. And later on, we started banding them with little rings from the Victorian Fisheries and Game Department.
This is a migratory bird, isn't it?
Yes, it's a small...
What is its course?
It's, well, they don't know, but they think it follows much the same course as the muttonbirds, up past the Australian coast, up through Japan, around to the Aleutians, and then possibly across to America and down the coast and across past Hawaii and back down with the muttonbirds. Something similar to that anyway, but it disappears after it's been nesting on the island. It leaves about March and then comes in again about October every year.
So your work on Cabbage Tree Island has been able to provoke a world study in this?
Yes, on 44 years I've been working on it there and banding them, later for the CSIRO from Canberra. And we've banded quite a lot. And then when I got my coronary, I couldn't do any more, so the CSIRO are carrying on where I left off.
Oh, that's fantastic. Athel D'Ombrain, it's also fantastic that you should be, if you don't mind me bringing it out again, of course, the first Maitland resident ever to receive the Order of Australia for your work on photography.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Athel D'Ombrain, it's been great to have you with the Valley's people. I'll be back in just a moment. Second guest today is ambulance officer of the New South Wales Ambulance. And of course there are plenty of those, but this one is a little more fascinating because his name is John McFarland. His father has been an ambulance officer before, in fact was on the board of Hunter District Ambulance, and John McFarland has kept the family traditions going. But more than that, he's also keeping the traditions of the ambulance going because historically, John, you're interested in collecting everything that you possibly can in the Hunter Valley, I believe, about the formation of the ambulance years ago.
That's correct, Ron, yes.
And I think one of the most fascinating things, because I read some of your articles that you've written for the Newcastle Historical Society, and the thing that intrigues me most is that we really don't have any comprehension today of what some of the people in that time span back meant by the ambulance. I wonder through your studies if you can give us a comparison. Well, I'll start with the today, shall I say, because today if something happens in the home, you think, one, go instantly to your telephone. Two, dial the ambulance, and if it's not there in 4 or 5 minutes, you're wondering where it is, I guess. Now, how do you contrast that with what would have happened at the beginning of your studies?
Well, when you think back to the days of the early or 1900, there was virtually no telephones around, so you can imagine how the people had problems from the start getting an ambulance. That is, you know, when the ambulance service did start. Right. But it would be quite hard in those days, because people would have to get a message through somehow to either the ambulance or the hospital involved. So you would find that there would, I think there'd be a lot of great time lapse, really.
And you're talking to some of the outer areas of the Hunter Valley. You're talking about a day excursion, aren't you?
This is right. Particularly Catherine Hill Bay come up quite a few times, and they looked upon Catherine Hill Bay as nearly a day trip.
Really?
This is by horse and cart, yeah.
Yeah. Now, where did the ambulance, as we know it in the Hunter Valley, really begin?
The ambulance service, as we know it now, originated in Bullaroo, Trealba. It was started by Mr. T.C. Frith. Frith's the merchants from Bullaroo. He's the instigator of the first ambulance service in this area.
Is that the meeting I read about when only 5 people turned up?
Yes, that's right,
Really?
only 5, yeah. Apparently Mr. Frith went out to Stockton, Borehole Colliery, looking for an order for chaff for his firm, and when he arrived there, they were just placing the body of a young 17-year-old boy on a horse and dray to take the lad home to the body home to his parents' home, and this is reputed to have shocked Mr. Frith that much that he called his public meeting to try and find some other means of transport for people like this.
Well, how did you excite the public towards that, firstly in Bullaroo and the other places?
Well, the Bullaroo one was mainly from that, but Newcastle was a different kettle of fish. It had tried many times to start the ambulance service, and it just failed, mainly through lack of public interest, I would presume. Really, because we went through the plague area as well, and nothing seemed to come from it. Really, the service was just run by the hospital in those days. Really, and it just didn't come forth till 1921. Really.
Then you had Maitland and Cessnock
yes,
and
Gosford.
Gosford.
They came later on. Yeah, Maitland came 1924, and then say that Gosford came 1928, which was started by Newcastle, and then Cessnock came, in the Cessnock area came roughly 1936. But from the start of Newcastle, the whole valley virtually opened up in the preceding years.
Yeah, it's hard to get that scenario in your mind, isn't it? Because another one of those articles that you wrote, I think it said that all the ambulance could do, if it was in fact an ambulance, was to take someone to the train, and they had to wait for the train to then...
Yes, there's been cases where people have been hurt in the outlying areas, particularly say coal mines. This thing. What used to happen? They were transported whichever means they could, may not be by ambulance, but they were transported to the local station. They may have to wait there for hours on end before the train came on to transport them to presumably the nearest largest town or city.
And it started with horse and carts.
That's right, horse and cart. Yes, this is right, the horse and cart, the old four-wheel wagon, canvas wagon. The original one from Bullaroo was owned by the Sulphide Corporation, and the horses themselves were owned by George Hawkins.
What, you had to go and round them up?
Yeah, they round them up, yes, that's right. A runner normally went from T.C. Frith's shop up to the Sulphide Corporation, got out the wagon, got the horse, saddle, harnessed the thing up, and off they went. Maybe, you imagine 15, 20 minutes later maybe. So, I mean, you wouldn't want to be very sick, put it that way.
You start to understand the stories of your grandparents may tell you now about you only call the ambulance as a last resort in those days.
This is right, yes, this is right. So, a fellow from Maitland said to me that they only had 2 types of patients, and they were either very, very well or very, very dead, nothing in between. So you can imagine with the time lapse, really.
Yeah, in fact, it's hard to imagine, isn't it?
This is right, yeah. People just take it for granted today, they don't realise all the trauma that went on years ago, really.
Now, John, you're relatively young to be looking at the history of the New South Wales ambulance. That's one thing, or the Hunter Valley ambulance in particular. But there's another thing that strikes me about it. People who usually start to put papers together do so at the end of their work. Now, you are an active ambulance officer, and yet your interest is still there. How did all that generate?
Well, funny thing happened. It came up in the course of conversation. My mother-in-law was the secretary of the society, and she said, "I have to get some speakers for the meeting." So as a joke, I just jumped in and said, "Oh, I'll speak one day if you like on the ambulance." So that's what actually started it. And I armed with a book that my father had given me on Newcastle ambulance, which is virtually the only one written in this area, really, and a couple of financial reports. I had a look up those, and of course I decided then that I'd go up to the library, the regional library up here, went to the local history section, And I was astounded that all they had was the same book that I had and 2 paper clippings. And I went away thinking, you know, that I then realised that there had been nothing written about the service in this area really. And I thought that if I don't do it now, that you know, 20 years time, 30 years time, it'll be too late. Of course, the officers, the old officers, will all be gone, and the history will be just, you know, go with them, unfortunately.
And this is a vast territory too, isn't it?
It is. The original territory that I'm chasing really went from as far as Gosford, right up to Taree, and up around Cessnock or Maitland as well. But the Hunter region now stretches right up to Murrurundi, really.
Yeah, you talk about studying those early financial papers and sheets, but then of course that brings back those memories of chocolate wheels and
Yeah,
Ralph, the ambulance man, had to do more. He had to
That's
really
right.
pay for himself, didn't he?
He had to. They worked their hours of work for the week, and on their off days they'd go out and they'd run raffle tickets and, you know, chocolate wheels, this thing. One fellow told me that he even sold post holes. Not the post holes with shilling a go, he said.
He's had a bit of folklore.
Right, yeah, no, he said this right. He would sell those, and his mate would go along with a post hole digger and dig the holes later on.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It's incredible, really.
Yeah.
It's different than what it is today, of course.
Yeah, and of course the old vehicles, they had to maintain those.
This is right. Years ago, the ambulance officer had to, or the ambulance bearer in those days, he changed the oil, you know, the tyres, just to clean them up, degrease them. Just to say, it's a vastly different story than what it is now, because we have a workshop which does all this work, really.
So this has now become your life's ambition, to put all this together.
Oh, it's an
Now, where are you
obsession,
getting
really.
the information for this obsession?
Mainly from, as I say, the annual reports as I get them become available.
But how
And
can
also,
people help you?
Oh well,
people
I do.
watching
Yeah,
today?
well, patience is one good avenue. I quite often, you know, strike a patient who has been either an officer or had a friend that wasn't an ambulance officer. This is, you know, I've got a lot of information that way. I chase up the retired ambulance officers as well.
Yeah.
You know, there's a vast, you know, area that I haven't really tapped. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot of them, and this is the problem with it.
Yeah, you're attired in uniform today, but the early uniforms must have been a little different from now.
Oh yeah, well, they were black and white in those days. We used to call them penguin uniforms. Similar to what the Salvation Army, the button-up front Salvation Army uniforms, they were like that. But I believe that they virtually had no shirts. Shirts in those, some of the days were unprocurable, and they just wore the button-up shirt with coat with no shirt underneath. So, I mean, the public didn't know really. They were always chasing, you know, after boots and pants and things. They just weren't there.
And they used to have to go collecting the outlying farms on motorbikes and all sorts of things.
Oh yes, the collectors, they had push bikes to start off with, and then motorbikes, and particularly around the Maitland area, we could imagine that they had to go out around the farms and things, and they would spend
what was the
days.
collection?
The
How much?
Well, this varies. You know, shipments a week, and it started off at a penny a week, and they say in the 20s, you know, come up right up to the shipments a week and sixpence and the shilling type of thing, and they used to, you know, go out all around the farms, getting contributions. Possibly stay out, you know, for 2 or 3 days at times with the peoples. They could build it out type of thing, they would.
I've been fascinated by the articles you've written, John, because today we see an ambulance, you know, which has got rescue vans and every piece of life-sustaining and support systems in it, and it's very hard, isn't it, to imagine the things that you are talking about now. I guess it's just as hard for you to imagine, although you see it from the inside. One of the other things that struck me was you talking about controversy, which even raged then about the speed of ambulances, even going back to the early days.
Yes. There's one case where there was an accident out around the not Belmont, Bullaroo area. Broadmeadow area.
Right.
And the patient was transported by the old wagon, horse and wagon, and the lady of the child concerned wrote in complaining about the speed of the horse. Apparently it had taken something like 10 or 12 minutes to go from Broadmeadow to the top of town, and she didn't like the speed of it.
Or the reckless driver.
This is right, yeah. And anyway, the nurses on there said that to them it was just a normal trip conveyed in a normal manner. But so the old horse must have been really, you know, really flying it. So when you think of the roads in those days compared with what they are now.
Not just a matter of switching on the siren like it is.
No, this is right. And even then, with the later years, the ambulances, the first ambulances, had a big brass bell on the side of the ambulance. So the driver would go along driving one hand, and he'd have to ring the bell with the other hand as well. And the funny thing about that is that after he did ring the bell, he had to go back to the station and write out a report why he rang the bell. So this was quite, you know, I dare say you wouldn't ring the bell very often.
No.
I wouldn't think. No, the ambulance officers don't like paperwork.
No.
So I'd say that's what
Oh, that's good, John. It's good that you should have those stories, but
Yes,
apart
that's
from that,
right,
it's
yeah.
also good that someone, at least, is knuckling down to put all this for posterity and for our heritage, putting it all together. You know, you've got a great story and you've got a vast territory to cover, and we wish you all the best with
yes,
it, and
yes.
we hope that in the end, the complete story of the Hunter Valley Ambulance will be told. Thanks for joining us today on the Valley's People. I'll be
Thank
back
you very
in
much.
just a moment. Our guest today, firstly Athel D'Ombrain, who spends some time watching the habits of migratory birds, the Gould petrel, and also John McFarland, who's spending his current life watching out for all photographs, information about ambulance in the Hunter Valley. I found them interesting, I hope you did, and I hope that you'll join me again in our next program of The Valley's People. Goodbye for now.